Two mistakes that I see lifters make pretty often, and the reason I know this is because I've made these two mistakes throughout my entire lifting history, and I tend to still make these mistakes even though I know better, which makes these two mistakes very difficult to combat because even when you know about them, you tend to still fall into the same trap. Actually, these two kind of solutions to these mistakes kind of work off of each other and stop you from making these two mistakes. I'm Max with Max Performance, and I'm going to jump into it. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. So, what's the first mistake? Pretty simple, training too heavy too often. Now, when you're a beginner or like an early stage intermediate, and maybe even an intermediate, you can kind of afford to train too heavy too often. The biggest, I'd say, reason you wouldn't do this is because you tend to practice really poor technique when you're going too heavy too often. So all of your training is poor technique, and it's like, when are you actually training good solid technique with suboptimal loads? Probably not very often. Like on your warm-up sets maybe, but once you get to your big main sets, your working sets, you're using too much weight to actually practice good technique. So and not to mention there's some other bad parts of this: higher potential for injury and burnout. Like, as you get stronger and as you start hitting heavier weights and you get higher to like your overall ceiling or potential for the amount of intensity you can throw on a bar, you find out pretty fast that you can't train too heavy too often. Mentally, it's exhausting having to go into the gym and hit these heavy weights all the time. And some people are obviously better equipped to it than others. Like, it really just depends how much overall stress you have in your life. But periods of sub maximal training can really help that. But anyway, some of the solutions to this is um, schedule your heavy training, like, which is going to work into my next kind of point. But it's like, have a plan and use some kind of linear progression to go from lower intensity to higher intensity. That could be on a 4 week like cycle. That could be like an 8 week cycle, a 12 week cycle. However you want to do it, there's a million different ways to program, like a million different training philosophies and principles and all that. So the real solution to the training too heavy too often is just schedule your heavy training. Another thing you can do is utilize AMRAP sets, as many reps as possible. That way you can use lower intensities, but you can also push the envelope a little bit. And you can do that in your periods of training where you're not training super heavy. And by too heavy too often, I mean, let's say you're doing 90% of your one rep max beyond, like, too often, right? So like, take 75% of your one rep max, or maybe even 75% of your training max, which is like 90%. And then you can do, good solid technique work with that weight, meaning like 5 sets of 5, 6 sets of 3, 6 sets of 2, something like that. And then you can take it for an AMRAP. You can do that on a weekly basis and not experience any burnout and be able to recover from it, I think, at least. So AMRAPs are a great way to add some intensity and some excitement into training and almost like get more out of your like kind of more stale sub-maximal stuff where you're not pushing the envelope a ton, real technique work. Um, and yeah, it can add some fun stimulus while also not subjecting you to too much risk, I suppose. And obviously, like, if you're an elite power lifter and you're deadlifting 1,000 pounds, like, 75% of your training max is still going to be a ton. So this does not really apply to elite lifters for the most part. I mean, kind of generally does, but they end up playing by their own rules. I mean, most people that are going to watch this are probably not going to be elite lifters. So take that with a grain of salt. Um, so yeah, schedule your heavy training, utilize AMRAP sets, and just don't be afraid to leave something in the tank. Like, especially in the US, like, people want to train till death every workout, and some people can sustain that kind of intensity for a long time, decades even, depending on how much they love training and what other things they have going in their life. But not everyone can sustain that, and to be honest, it's kind of unsustainable. You're going to burn out eventually. So anyways, first mistake, training too heavy too often. I kind of gave you the reasons why it doesn't make sense and the solutions. The next point I want to make is people not having goals or not having a plan to achieve your goals. So with your training, you should really have goals. Like, you should have numbers you want to hit in your head. And these don't have to, you can have incremental numbers you want to hit, and then you can have like your all time greatest numbers you want to hit. Like me, I would like to bench 350 paused on the flat bench I'd have to look at my program, which is my next point, but it kind of, I have a plan on how I'm going to get there, how long it's going to take. Um, Trying to think, it would probably be within a year or two, something like that, which to some people might be like, that's way too long. Me, I've been training for a long time, so that doesn't bother me. A year or two, I'm like, I'd rather make little bits of progress over a year or two and just make no progress at all, And that's where having a plan and having goals comes into play. So what I personally do is I figure out what numbers I want to hit, and then I create some kind of training program with some kind of linear progression involved. Typically, it's like an American style where I'm going from higher reps with lower intensities to lower reps with higher intensities, right? Like that kind of curve. And I'm doing like a 12-week cycle, and then I'm adding 5 to 10 pounds. I'm doing another 12-week cycle. I'm just stepping it up, making minor adjustments along the way. But not having goals and not having a plan basically creates stagnation, lack of progress, which turns into lack of interest. It also can create a lot of psychological unrest and unhappiness, especially if you're really into lifting weights and you're not making progress and it's a big part of your life and what makes life enjoyable. You're not going to feel good about that. So having a plan, and it's also a waste of your time if you're just going and spinning your wheels. Training is fun in itself, don't get me wrong, but making progress is the point of it. Like if you're not making any progress in any way, what's really the point? You're just kind of going in and doing the same thing constantly. So again, the solution to that is figure out what your goals are. Like my lifetime natural goals, and these might sound a little bit crazy. I'd like to squat 650, deadlift 750, and bench 450. Now I might be 10 years out from that. I might be 20 years out from that. I don't know. Like I haven't planned out that far. Those are just numbers I have in my head. But yeah, you got to have goals and you got to have a plan. So anyways, I'm Max with Max Performance. Don't train too heavy, have a plan, have goals. I'll catch you in the next one.